to week 3 of our study on Genesis 12 through 26. Yay! In case you were unsure, this week we will be teaching on Genesis 18 to 21:21. Before I get started, I want to quickly do, because I've had a couple questions about schedule, and here's a draft, but there may be some modifications to it. Okay. So this week, April 13 and 14, we are week 3. Next week, I am traveling for work. There will be no study. So I'll be in Dallas, and I won't get back until very late Monday. And rather than be teaching different weeks to different groups, it's no study next week. So if you're behind, great chance to catch up. I'm sure nobody's behind. The following week is the 27th of April. We will be doing it's week 4, and that's Genesis 21 through Genesis 24. And then May 4th is the last week of this study. I know it's small, but it's as big as I can get it and get everything still on the screen. Then we'll have a break. And my first thought is that we'll just take the rest of May off and start the next one in June. However, there's one caveat to that, which is that because I've had other things going on, I have not started writing the next Bible study. So I may need another week. So currently, it's targeting that we'll start the next one June 1st. It may get pushed off a week till June 8th. So it just depends on what I can get done. So, but I will tell you on that last week of May 4th, if we're starting the 1st or if we're starting the 8th for the next one. So it's just, I was hoping to be halfway done, but I have actually, and I don't know if any of you subscribe to the YouTube channel, but I have been busy recording teachings for the last session. So those have been writing the scripts, recording those multiple times. And then well, I'm glad you enjoy them. Yes. Because ultimately that study will get published, and if anybody's doing it, remotely in a small group, that will be the teaching that will go alongside with that. So that's been a priority for me, is getting all that bundled up. I am a little over halfway done. I have there's 2 weeks I wasn't happy with the lighting on, and then there's another week that I actually have. Anyway, it's progressing, but that's been my more urgent priority than writing Genesis 27 through 50. Probably TMI here, but the long and the short of it, the important things to remember is no Bible study next week, and we will be on a break from May 11th through the rest of May. So there'll be a 3-week break, possibly a 4-week break. Okay? All right. So, and that hopefully can get some people refreshed and reset, because I know people just have a lot going on in their lives, and I appreciate all of your faithfulness in coming. So let's talk about this week. So it's Genesis 18 to 20, and I will tell you, I struggled to find, I spent a lot of time, maybe not struggled, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was the right sort of what I'll call the core teaching of Genesis 18 to 22. Those of you who have worked through the workbook and have read the material, it covers a very diverse topics. It starts with the God, the Lord, and 2 angels coming to Abram and Mamre and telling him and Sarah that they're going to have a baby in 12 months' time, and Sarah laughs, and we We all know that story. And then there's the story. And then it moves on to Abraham interceding for Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we have the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah and God's destruction of them. And then we move to this section, and you can, by what's on the screen, you can guess what I'm going to talk about. And then we move into this story of Abraham and Abimelech in Genesis 20. And then in the first part of 21, we have the birth of Isaac. So those seem like very discrete, standalone teachings. And what's the thread? But the more I really looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, one of the things that is important to remember is that this sequence, while there have been a lot of times where there have been huge time gaps in the narrative, there'll be 20, 13, 15, 10 years between one verse and the next verse. Here, from 2021 till about, I think it's where the birth of Isaac, it's 12 months time. God says, I will come to you again in about a year's time and you will have a son. So 18, 19, 20, and the first several, about 6, 7 verses of chapter 21 all occur in a 12-month period. So the narrative is tightly connected. It flows. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. When I started to look more closely at chapter 20, one of the things that became apparent to me is that it really seems to be something that in a strange way is pulling together some themes and is reaching back and pulling upon things that happened in 18 and 19 and pushing forward into what happens in 21. So there are some things that it's like these threads that are weaving through, and 20 seems to be a point that captures it through the whole. So that's why I've chosen 20. Once again, probably more explanation than you need. All right, so let's jump in to Genesis 20. From there, Abraham journeyed towards the territory of the Negeb and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, she's my sister. Said of Sarah, his wife, she's my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Couple things. The from there in this passage is, again, it's one of these reach backs. So in this, the narrative is actually going back to the end of Genesis 19. And it's in verses starting in Genesis 19:27. So God has destroyed Sodom, and then Lot's wife looks back, but then we go, and Abraham went early in the morning to the place, and I don't have a slide for this, where he stood before the Lord. So Abraham walked, and he went to that place where he interceded with God, and because he's like, I need to know what happened. I've just interceded. Remember, Abraham has interceded with God. He's in now, has an expectation. Did it work? Were there 10? What's going on? So Abraham comes, and he looks down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the valley, and behold, he looked, and the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So this is the from there. It's from Mamre. It's from this point where Abraham is going, oh, there weren't 10. There weren't 10. Now, there could be a little bit more, and it is all speculation because it is not in the text. The text does not tell us why Abraham moves. Speculation is that after this passage, we see Lot being afraid to live in Zoar, either because, is God going to continue his pouring out on wrath and the next city get hit? Abraham, I think, Hopefully it doesn't have that fear, but you can also see now where there would be flocks and fields, and people who weren't in Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be looting the flocks oh, look, these are the flocks of the people in Sodom. They're dead now. They're mine. But the ground and the territory around those cities would have been spoiled, so they would have been coming in and encroaching on other lands for grazing. So it is probably becoming not a safe place. So these, again, speculation. I'm happy to be totally wrong on that one because it is speculation. But there's also, it sort of rationally makes sense of some things that could be happening. So he goes. And again, we go, Abraham, Abraham, Abraham. Didn't you do this just a few chapters before? Mm-hmm. And that's the way of sin. It's like once we kind of open the door and we establish this pathway, the next time it's a little easier. And the next time it's a little easier. And the next time it's like, poof, we're there before we even know it. It just becomes our new default. Our default setting in a certain situation where we feel threatened is to do this. So, but again, and I do want to say this, before I underlined and took Sarah. Before we start thinking of Abimelech as 100% this perfect moral character, because while he does some things wrong, he stole her without asking permission, without engaging in negotiations for a bride price. He took Sarah. It wasn't, hey, I'd like your sister as my wife, let's negotiate a bride price, and then Abraham stalls and, 3 years later they're still negotiating. No, he took her. So there was force that occurred. Again, there is let's not act like Abimelech is this totally without any sort of guilt person. Just want to say that. Okay. However, very quickly. So I don't know how soon. Let's hold our timeline for a second. 18, we have 12 months until Isaac. Within 24 hours, Sodom is destroyed. Within probably 48 to 72 hours, Abraham's on the path to Gerar, has moved all of his household to Gerar. 9 months to get Isaac, right? So we're sitting in this period in Gerar in which this chapter 20 happens. It can be up to a period of 3 months, but it won't be more. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Because we have to have time for Isaac to be born, Sarah to be pregnant, and we have to have this period where she's not pregnant. Okay. So, but God came to Abimelech in a dream. Yeah. By night, and said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now, there are dreams I want to get from God, but you are a dead person is not on the list. And so God is very explicit. You have taken a man's wife. Now, Abimelech rightfully says, but has not had sexual relations with Sarah. So he responds, Lord, will you kill an innocent people? And because he's the king, he recognizes what happens to him happens to his people. There is this sense of how things work there. Does this sound familiar? What happened in chapter 18? Lord, you're just. Would you kill the righteous? For the sake of the wicked? Are you going to kill these, if there's 10 of them, won't you, or 50, 40, 30, are you going to kill the whole city for the sake of these? I mean, you're just. Abimelech doesn't know God. Abimelech is not in relationship with God. But there is this in his core, because he is still created by God, this sense of, would you kill? I'm innocent of the crime. Our internal sense of justice just rears up, and it did with him. I haven't done this. And well, God has a few other points to make. But I think we need to remember is that understanding of God's character isn't limited to those of us who are in covenant with him. We are created by him. There's something in everyone, every human being, that, what drives a lot of things. Now, when it isn't anchored in who God is, when it isn't anchored in the reality of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, then it goes astray. It gets co-opted by the enemy and taken, and things happen. But a sense of justice comes from God. And just as a side note, because I can't help myself, one of the things is we want to think that dreams and communication with God is reserved for God's people. But in Genesis, we actually see there are multiple times. This is the first time that someone who is not in covenant, in effect an outsider, receives a dream from God. It occurs again with Laban, and we see it with the Egyptian butler and baker, and we see it with Pharaoh. So there's 4 times in Genesis alone where someone outside of the covenant receives this communication from God. Now, I think it happens in a dream, so it sort of cuts through the noise. But we also know that today a lot of Muslims are being saved because God comes to them in a dream about who is Jesus. They have a vision of Jesus in a dream. This, not to say that God doesn't give dreams to his covenant people, because we see that too. But there is this sense that God communicates with everyone, but the extent of that communication is greater with those of us. God speaks to those of us in covenant relationship with, but he will come in a dream and communicate. But I think there is a sense of urgency in God. It's like, I don't know how long this has been. We'll find out. It's been long enough for it to be obvious that Abimelech's women can't bear children. So something has happened. So some amount of time, but again, not a long. And God has a timeline now. Sometimes God is waiting for us to move, but God has committed to 12 months. And God will not allow that promise. So Abimelech continues in his defense. Did he not himself, he told me, she is my sister, and she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Well, you stole her, so let's not make you so innocent. But there is some innocence, and also there is one of the things too, there is a recognition that stealing a man's wife and sleeping with her is wrong. So he's not reacting to, while it's okay to steal her sister, his wife and sleeping with her while they're still married is wrong. And it is observed by someone even not, again, in a covenant relationship. And then, and then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart. And it was I who kept you from sinning against me. So I know you didn't do anything because I didn't let you. There are times God will, when, we see there are some occasions in the Bible where God doesn't leave it to chance. He moves. He cannot have there be questions about who is the paternity of Isaac. Isaac is Abraham's heir. And this reminds us of Psalm 51:4. Against you and only you have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. The sin of adultery is against God. It's that big of a deal. Now, therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's life, for he is a prophet, so that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you will surely die, and all who are yours. I know what I'd do. But we feel the weight and the seriousness of what's going on. So there's a couple things here, too. So while this is not the first time, so let's start first. I'll go with the word pray, so that he, Abraham, will pray for you. The word in Hebrew is palal, and of the 60 times it occurs in the Old Testament, 25 of them relate to intercession. So one of the things we see happening is that in this idea of praying is very much, almost 50% of the time, it's the sense of to intercede. Because what Abraham's going to do is he's going to intercede for Abimelech and his people. Now, the word pray didn't happen in 18, but there is this big thread. Abraham interceded for Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham will intercede for Abimelech. Again, these themes. This who we are and what we are to do. That we are to intercede for those who have offended us, for those who have harmed us. We aren't just to say, God, smite them. They hurt me. We are actually to step in. And then connected to this is, for he is a prophet. And this is the first time the word prophet is used in the Old Testament, is when God refers to Abraham as a prophet. Now, there's a couple things I want to pull out of here. The first thing is identity. Abraham hasn't been acting like a prophet. You know, we look at Elijah and Elisha and Moses and these powerful, mighty men of God, and they're righteous and they're strong and they're doing the right thing. Abraham has been, and we'll dig into this a little later, far from that. Far from that. He has not trusted God to protect him. He has lied. He has done all sorts of things, and we'll find out later it gets even worse. But God, in the midst of Abraham's failings and mistakes, God calls out who he is. And he doesn't call out, you're right, Abraham was a jerk, but, you know, I'm in covenant with him, so you have to treat him right. No, God says he is a prophet, and he will pray for you. And as the result of that, you shall live. So, you want to make sure he prays for you. As this plays out, he's a prophet, he will pray for you. The other thing it tells us here is that, again, is when we saw what was clearly intercession in 18, it wasn't linked to the prophetic. But here, by calling Abraham a prophet and then immediately following with, he will pray for you, God has inexorably linked what it means to be a prophet and interceding. And there's a lot of ways we think about what is a prophet. But one of the ways to think about them, they are someone who is connected to the heart of God and displays the heart of God to the world. And in interceding, Abraham will show Abimelech, it is not God's heart that you die and be destroyed, but he is protecting his promise. So Abraham will need to push through his fear, push through his lack of trust, push through his failures. God sees our identity beyond our mistakes, beyond our failures, and beyond our flaws. Yes, write that in the who I am, or who God is, or both. And then we will see that Abraham does pray. Because as servants of God, we have the job to display his heart. We are to pray for those who have harmed us and offended us. We don't get to pick and choose. All right, so moving right along. So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. I bet they were. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done? What have you done?" There's this, again, thinking about what happened in 18. So again, these themes. Abraham appeals to God and challenges God. God, would you do such a thing? Would you destroy a city? Abimelech, what have you done? You have exposed us to destruction. So we see a complete reversal. In one case, in 18, Abraham's the one who is defending Sodom and Gomorrah, and here we have Abraham is the one who is in many ways the instrument by which these people are now at risk. And how have I sinned against you? So what did I do to you that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What did you see? There's this, Abimelech is how horribly, what did I do that you would set me up for this sin and the punishment?" And I want to take a second here and go kind of on a little bit of a rabbit trail, because I can. So, great sin. That's two words, one that means great, one that means sin. We see these words appearing close context multiple times in Scripture. So in Genesis 39, 8 through 9, where Joseph and Potiphar's wife, it says, Joseph is talking about his wife and says, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Not exactly the same thing as a great sin, but again, this idea of sin, adultery is against God, and adultery is not just a sin, it's a great sin. But what becomes interesting is how this word pair starts to shift. It is not applied to adultery after Genesis. However, in Exodus 32, 30, and 31, it is applied to adultery. And in this case, it isn't just the words great and sin are used closely. It is an exact word pair match. The next day, Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. That was the sin of the golden calf." What? Idolatry. Idolatry, yes. It was idolatry. Adultery with us is a great sin. Idolatry is adultery to God. It is the same thing. That's how God views idolatry. It is as if we are committing adultery to him. It is a capturing of our heart and a twining of our heart with someone who we are not in covenant relationship with. Adultery is a marriage covenant. A marriage covenant. Adultery is twining your heart and becoming one flesh with someone not your covenant partner. Idolatry, same thing. We also see, again, while it's not, and then later in 2 Kings, where we're talking in 17:21, where we're talking about Jeroboam, who sets up the two calves. He, again, a very specific, the golden calf, I believe, at Bethel and in the other place, he sets up two golden calves. And it goes, when he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. Idolatry, adultery. Now there's a couple other occasions where sin and being great occur, but not as this great sin. So in 1 Samuel 2:17, the sons of Eli, and they are taking offerings from the Lord that's supposed to go to the Lord. They're taking the fat and they're taking the good offerings, and instead of offering to the Lord, they're taking them for themselves. Thus the sin of the young man was very great. So the sin was very great. But again, there is this, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. And the only other time where we get this tie between sin and great is when David numbered the people. So, for example, there's two recountings of this, one in Chronicles and one in 2 Samuel. So in 2 Samuel 24:10, but David's heart struck him after he had numbered the people, and David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Oh, now, Lord, please take away the iniquity from your servant, for I have done foolishly. So this idea of a great sin is a big deal. But I think this, to me, the thought that adultery and idolatry are so closely related in the way the Bible thinks about them. But again, it's this reversal of the challenges. Here we, again, in 18, Abraham challenged God to protect. And here in 20, Abimelech challenged Abraham because he did not protect. In fact, he actually exposed Abimelech. Moving along, Abraham said, I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in the place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not through the daughter, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God caused me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do to me at every place where we come. Say of me, he is my brother. So this has been an entrenched deception that has happened. We hear of it these two times. We don't know how many times it has happened. We know of these two times because these had specific implications on the promise of God. But look at Abraham's reply here. Well, I had a really good reason for exposing you this way and setting this up. I didn't think you, and this is actually ironic because Abraham says there's no fear of God at all in this place. And what we really see is Abimelech has more fear of God than Abraham. That Abraham is more afraid of Abimelech than he trusts God. Abimelech now is terrified. If you read those verses before, Abimelech is like, I could die. What have you done? He's afraid of God and what he's done, and he's bound and determined to set it right. Abraham lies to protect Sarah and himself, but his lie is useless. Because he tried to protect with his lie, and in the end, he just exposed them both. He did neither. He didn't protect Sarah, and he didn't protect himself. Ultimately, in this story, it will be God who protects Sarah. It's God who brings in 18, who will bring the child of promise. It's God who protects Lot in the story of Sodom. It's God who protects Abraham and Sarah in this story. It's God who protects his promise And then it is God in 21 who delivers on his promise. Abraham's self-effort to protect are useless. Ultimately, the lie is sin. Yes, lying is wrong. But the real heart of the sin of the lie is that it demonstrates Abraham's lack of trust in God. Abraham's been told in 12 months' time. And he doesn't trust, even with all he's seen, he doesn't trust God enough to protect him and to protect Sarah. Because how can you have Abraham and Sarah have a son if I'm dead? I can't have a son if I'm dead. So I'm going to live because God promised it. Now, we don't always have those promises. And I'm not saying go be foolish. But God has promised a child in 12 months' time. In the end, we need to trust God. That's what we need to do. But we also cannot presume what God will do. So the story that a great children's story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as they're going into the fire, what is it they say? Why don't I read it? If I can get to, boom. Oop, I'm in Jeremiah, not in Daniel. Daniel's pretty far back in the book. There we go. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that we have set. In their trust of God, they didn't presume that God would take them through the furnace. They stated, God is able to do this, but I don't know what his plan will be. And I am not going to require my faith in him to depend on what he does. But they placed their trust in God, and we know that story. Trust God. Abraham failed in this story dramatically to trust God. But yet, what did God call him just a few verses before? He called him a prophet. Our identity and the way God sees us is not entangled in our failures. God sees us beyond that. Our flaws, our weaknesses are not our identity. Our identity is tied to God's faithfulness, not our own efforts. And in his lie, Abraham tried to protect himself and Sarah, but the lie was worthless. The lie did not protect. It is only in trusting God. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants and gave them to Abraham and returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you. So one of the things when we read the story with Pharaoh in verse 12, Pharaoh says, get out. Here, Abimelech says, no. So there is some recognition in what has happened of the favor of God on Abraham. And that's the thing. As we go through and we encounter those who are not in covenant, not in the new covenant, not Christians, there will be some who say, hey, be with me. I recognize there's something on your life. I don't know what it is, but I want to sit under the umbrella of that blessing. There will be others who say, get out. We don't decide who they are, but we respond, as appropriate. And notice how much, again, so sheep and oxen and male servants and female servants. Abraham is becoming quite a wealthy man by these we see as egregious failures. But God is bigger than our failures. God is bigger than our flaws and our mistakes. To Sarah, and I love this one, to Sarah. So now Abimelech is specifically addressing Sarah, not Abraham. Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is a sign of your innocence in the eyes of all who are with you, and before everyone you are vindicated. Now, Pharaoh gave gifts only to Abraham, but didn't ever address Sarah. And when you look at that, what Pharaoh did, it appears to be a bride price. It's like, I'm not going to marry her, but I'm going to give her the bride price. Here it actually seems to be more of a way, because it's a sign of your innocence in the eyes and that you're vindicated. And it also seems to be some sort of offering to God, an appeasement of God and the God of Abraham and Sarah. And this idea of 1,000 pieces of silver, to put it in context, an average worker in Babylon made half a piece of silver a month. I think the estimate is something like 120 or 150 years for an average worker to make 1,000 pieces of silver. So this is not incidental. This is huge. And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and also healed his wife and female servants so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. And here we see again this linking and connection. So we are told before that Sarah was barren and Sarah's womb was closed. And we know from 18 that God is going to open her womb. But here, in this amazing irony, for all of these years that Abraham has been with Sarah, God has not healed Sarah. But here, on Abraham's prayer, all these women who couldn't bear, who were barren, who were like Sarah, who were made to be like Sarah because of what Abimelech did to Sarah, God heals. So we see, you can think of it as a foreshadow. Both ironic that Abraham can pray for others and they get healing, but his wife can't. But also a foreshadowing, because it's God who heals Abimelech and his wife and his female servants. And we know in just a few verses, God has healed Sarah. She can bear children. So again, as we see this thread that's weaving through 20 that picks up things that are going on in all of these chapters. And I want to just, and this is, end with a quote, and I don't have a slide for it. By revealing Abraham's weaknesses in the midst of these significant events, the narrator captures the magnitude of Abraham's obedience and also inspires the reader's own faith struggles. The disclosure of Abraham's failures also confirms God's sovereignty and power. He is gracious in election and capable of working out his good purposes through his human servants. God works through flawed vessels to accomplish his purpose. It is not our flaws that allow God to accomplish his purposes. It is our trust in God and his faithfulness. Because one of the things, once again, that is clear is God is faithful. He is faithful to protect Abraham. He is faithful to protect Sarah. He is faithful to protect his promise. The faithfulness of God becomes this anchor. And that's one of the big threads too, that is woven throughout 18, 19, 20, and 21. The faithfulness of God. And that is